Hello everybody and welcome to another amazing video of DIY investing. I have a very important breakdown because Bitcoin is now sitting right on top of that $69,000 level. We've talked extensively about why it's so important that Bitcoin holds above those prior all-time highs because that'll give us that next move into price discovery. We're going to be mapping out the stock market, why the stock market being at a reversal point will ultimately send Bitcoin into a new all-time high. We're going to map out the dollar, why the dollar breaking down from this level is ultimately very bullish for Bitcoin and the rest of the altcoins, and then we're going to be finishing up mapping out what I think is going to be happening with the altcoins, why we're looking at another reversion into this new cycle, and then ultimately finishing up with Ethereum and what the altcoins are doing as a whole. Guys, if at any point you find value in this video, please do me a favor, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. And if you do want to see how I'm investing my portfolio long term, links are in the description to go ahead and sign up on my website. Right off the bat, guys, we're going to draw the most important line on this entire graph, which is going to be taking us all the way back at this prior all-time high level. And the reason we're going to be doing that is because if you guys notice, we're once again right on top of that level. We're working on it, attempting a breakout. Are we going to get it? I don't know, but it's super important that we hold this. Every one of these wicks or candle bodies have reacted to this level and have been unable to produce any sort of breakout. And we can see that there's a ton of these all the way throughout here. All we've been doing over the last couple weeks has just been consolidating right on top of this level once again. And we've been below it. We've closed below it here, we've closed below it here, here, and now in the shorter time frames, we've managed to get this move all the way up to $70,300, and we're just closing right back down on top. Are we going to hold this? I don't know, but it's so important that on the 4 hour, if you guys notice, we're landing here flush. This red candle is just sitting on top of it as support. It's very important that this acts as support and we get that reversion, because as long as we stay above this level, I do believe that that sets us in for a new all-time high. It's so important that we end up holding this, because this is the most important level on the entire graph. In my opinion, guys, if we end up losing this rejects and we end up falling lower, it's probably going to end up being because of the stock market. Because at the stock market, if we come out to the daily time frame, this is the S&P 500. Bitcoin bounced because the stock market bounced today. But if you guys notice, this is the prior high. This was the prior all-time high. We made a new one, but now we're closing back below it. This big red candle is actually taking us back below it, so that's not looking as bullish as it could. We did get this big buyback, but now that we're kind of closing back below these prior range highs, it does at least show the potential that we could be seeing further downside. On the hourly, we're getting this little bounce in here, but big picture, we need to see this thing get back above these range highs. This was the prior all-time high that we were holding above. We kind of need to get back above those if we're going to be seeing this thing going back into price discovery. Because Bitcoin is so correlated to the stock market, being the S&P 500, if this thing was to drop and we start going for a new low, I find it a little bit more likely Bitcoin would reject off of this level. It's not always, but it is, more oftentimes than not, that's what's going to take place. So for Bitcoin to hold this level, it is very bullish. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with the stock market, but as long as we're sitting above 69,000, I do think that this sets up for the potential of us going into that brand new all-time high. And so I'm going to keep you guys updated as follows regarding that move. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what happens if we don't break out, right? What happens if we actually lose this level? This rejects, this turns into a big rejection candle, and then it looks like we're going to see downside. There's only really one consolidation that this reminds me of, and that's pretty much when we first started actually making the reversion after the COVID capitulation. This looks a lot like the same consolidation, this big triangle consolidation. And where I think that we're at, if we were to lose this level, I think that we're right here at this lower high, right? Before we start making this slow, drawn out, choppy sort of capitulation all the way back down to the mid-range, to the range lows. And then that will be the reversion into our new cycle. I think that that's the most likely scenario that happens if we were to in fact lose this level that we're at right now. Because I think that the capitulation that we'd have wouldn't be like this and this massive lower low. I know some people are drawing it that way. I do find it much more likely that we would just kind of have this slow, drawn-out capitulation, come back down to the mid-range, maybe even back down to the low cycle range at like 61.3, 61.5, before we get that next leg up. We'd be looking at like the end of the summer before we started to get that next leg up. And I wouldn't be surprised to see this play out. I think a lot of people would expect some big capitulation, really shake everything out. But the truth is that because all of our corrections up to this point have been pretty small, notice how all of these have been very small, there's a lot more buy support than ever before. And with the approval of the ETF, I think that there's only going to want to be more people to buy and accumulate this. And when I look at the current consolidation of Bitcoin, It looks just like this type of a setup that we just kind of slowly capitulate, shake out all the weak hands as the volatility dies out in the market, go sideways for a couple months, and then that'll give us that next leg up. I think most people will assume that this is where we're going to break down. Everybody will say, oh, we're bearish, we're going lower. And then that lower low just never will come. So that's kind of what I'm leaning towards when I'm looking at the price of Bitcoin, but it really is revolving around how we hold around this $69,000 level. Bullish above, bearish below, that's my opinion. Do I think we go for a lower low? I'm not really expecting it, but if we do lose this level, it does at least point the conclusion we could. I see two scenarios that are bearish. The bearish one would be this, where we just kind of bleed out and go sideways for a little bit. That's the one I think is most likely, just because we already had this big capitulation down in here, made a reversion all the way back up to the range highs. I think that if we were to get a correction, it's only going to take us back down to the range lows and even the mid-cycle range of this consolidation. However, there is always the potential where if we started to really drop right down in here, we had one final capitulation, maybe back down to 50K, and then this entire move would be more of an A, B, and a C correction before we got a reversion. I don't know what's going to happen. And at the end of the day, I never try and predict the price, because you guys know that we've been invested since the 4-year cycle low. We've been super heavily accumulated as we were beginning this new cycle. And so now that we're already into this move, getting ready for price discovery, you know, if we see a deeper correction, it doesn't change anything for me because I'm just holding long term. The big thing that most people are going to do to themselves is, we're just in this early part of the cycle, is they're going to get too greedy profit taking. Maybe people, you know, are worried about a big correction, a 20-30% pullback. But for me, I'm not really worried about those, because I get invested based off the 4-year cycles. I'm accumulating at the cycle lows for Bitcoin. And then once I have my accumulation, I'm pretty much just sitting on it the whole cycle. And so when I'm sitting in these points right now, all we're looking to do is just hold. It's better to hold the length of the trend, because if you've bought any of those top performing altcoins that you're going to end up seeing those take off in a big way this cycle. In the last cycle, I bought Phantom Network, I bought Solana, I bought Terra Luna, all at basically their cycle lows. And I sold all of them too early. You know, I still made a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of profit, but had I have just held those and allowed the cycle to just fully get to where it was going to get, because I held a lot of stuff that long. It's just that when things go vertical and you're holding those really good returning altcoins that are outperforming everything, you don't really have a reference point anymore once they go into price discovery. So a lot of people will get really greedy taking profits, understandably so. Like, I totally feel you. It's important to take profits. But if you're holding any of these altcoins that are going to get massive adoption, you miss out and lose so much by just trying to sell too early. And that's why I say that if you're worried about these type of corrections, as we're still back below these prior all-time highs, yes, it would be a big drop. Yeah, it'd be another 20-30% drop that we were to see, you know, from this range high if we were to do that, about 30% exactly. That'd be a big drop in the altcoins. However, for me personally, I don't care, because the downside risk is not nearly as great as the upside potential loss. What happens is, you guys got to think of this from a psychological perspective, because it's all psychology. If you yourself are thinking, oh man, the market could drop, I need to sell half, or I need to sell, a great majority of my portfolio, if not all of it, and go into the cash, because I can't stomach to see a drop that big. I got to protect my capital. There's no way in hell you're ever going to hold to 100x or 1000x, and you're not going to ever hold those really good outperforming investments, because you've already got it in your head that you're so risk adverse that you need to be taking profits right off the bat. Like I said, guys, I literally missed out on tens of millions of dollars had I have just held those outperforming altcoins. And this is the thing I'm not doing this cycle again. I'm literally holding my bags. I don't care about these short-term corrections, because if you were following my channel and we were buying and accumulating back down in here, who the hell cares about a correction if we're still below those prior all-time highs? All I'm focused on is what happens when we get into new all-time highs, considering we have on-ramps like never before, we have institutional demand, we have all of the governments that are pivoting to being pro-crypto. Why would we be getting so worried about these shorter time frame price movements when the big picture is watching all of these institutions pump our bags and watching retail FOMO into them? I'm not worried about the chump change, 30% pullbacks, 20% pullbacks, even 50% pullbacks. I held through the COVID dip in the last cycle, and I was greatly rewarded for doing so. So when we're getting into this one and we're seeing a lot of the same similarities, I'm not even saying that this thing is going to have a bearish scenario, but at the worst of the worst case scenario it does, I still don't even care. It's not something I'm worried about because I want you guys to understand that my position is always in the long term. We're invested based off the 4-year cycles. We're playing that trend as follows. And so we really shouldn't be worried about, selling and jumping into cash because of a potential correction that may or may not even come. The focus for us is always what happens when these altcoins get into price discovery, which ones are going to end up outperforming the most, and when they do, are we going to be able to have the nerve and the conviction to hold a 20, a 50, and 100x plus as we're getting towards the latter end of this cycle? That's what is important, and that's what my plan is, and so that's why I'm not really too worried about the shorter time frames for Bitcoin. The most important thing is just that we hold this $69,000 level, which so far we are. I'll keep you guys updated as follows. Big thing over here is the DXY. The DXY is breaking down from a very important level. This has kind of been a very big resistance level for us as we've been consolidating here since 2023. We've rejected off of it. We made a false attempt at a breakout there. Even most recently, we made a false attempt at a breakout there. And as you guys can see, we've closed bearish here. And now we're currently closing bearish once again right here. So it is looking very bullish for the rest of the markets. However, being the stock market looking a little bit weak down in here, the S&P 500, if Bitcoin's going to continue to follow this to a 90% correlation, it's a little bit skeptical what happens with Bitcoin if this thing is going to end up falling off a cliff. If this drops for a lower low, I honestly think that Bitcoin's going to do the same. So we just need to be very aware of that right now. It's really riding around the stock market, but the DXY is throwing up mixed signals. The DXY is underperforming because we're seeing gold markets doing well, we're seeing silver markets, other commodities doing well. So it's not like we're only going to see this thing go down and the stock market go up every single time. Sometimes they can kind of invert, but the big thing is now that we're losing this level in the stock market, it's hard to say whether Bitcoin's going to actually hold 69,000. If we don't, then I think that we're definitely going to be bearish for at least a mid-cycle retest being basically 64,000 all the way down to $61.4 thousand. Coming over here, the most important chart for altcoins is obviously going to be the Bitcoin dominance. And the thing I want you guys to be paying attention is really where we're looking at this reversion is lining up perfectly with prior cycle tops. Looking at our first cycle for altcoins, 2017 was by far the biggest one, and it was because altcoins were actually going into price discovery against Bitcoin. As Bitcoin dominance was falling into a new all-time low, it meant that altcoins as a whole were in price discovery. Bitcoin went from 97% all the way to 35% here. Now in our last cycle, once we ended up getting this topping point, we got hidden bearish divergence where Bitcoin dominance made this final sort of bull trap up. And then we can see that we ended up making a lower high in the RSI. This would have been hidden bearish divergence. And this is what produced us our last cycle. However, we can see in comparison to 2017, it was a lot smaller. We didn't even come all the way back down to retest the cycle low. This one bottomed at 40%. So there was a big difference in the size. It wasn't nearly as volatile. There wasn't nearly as much profit to be made. However, as we're looking at our current cycle, we have 3 lower highs here happening on the RSI, yet we're just constantly making higher highs and higher lows. I wouldn't be surprised if we made one more move up here to 58% dominance before we sort of capitulated back down. Maybe we retest this one more time like this before it breaks down. I'm leaning towards this scenario playing out. And once again, guys, this is going to be the first cycle since that 2017 bull run where these altcoins are outperforming Bitcoin and they're actually in price discovery against Bitcoin. Meaning for the first time since 2017, Bitcoin dominance is going to be falling into a brand new all-time low like this. I really think that this is what's in store for us going into this next cycle, and there's a lot of things telling us telling this in the charts. We can look at a number of different fundamental factors between the ETFs, between many of these different approvals that are now going to be taking place in the altcoins, and I think the most important chart that we can look at is really Ethereum, because as we're looking at Ethereum, we can see that Ethereum has made this big move with the Ethereum ETF approval. However, it's looking weak in the shorter time frames. I'm not going to be the least bit surprised to see Ethereum make a correction back down to about $3,400, come back down to the mid-cycle range right here before we get that sort of next leg up into price discovery. This is what I'm leaning towards, because if we come over and look at the ETH BTC pair, this thing has just retested this descending resistance once again. And if we jump into the shorter time frames, we're looking at kind of this first little impulse happening in here. This is a wave 1, this is a wave 3, and I believe that this would have been a wave 5 here. And then all we're looking at here is some type of ABC. And I think we're going to be coming back down to retest this prior support that we were holding. Because before we made this final capitulation, you know, we were basically holding above this support. We had all these different attempts at a breakdown, and then when we did breakdown, we ended up retesting it here and here. I think that all we're going to end up doing is retesting this once again before we get that next breakout and finally get the reversion outside of this descending resistance. Big picture, this will be the first breakout for ETH BTC since all the way back, you know, in our last cycle. The difference is I think that this thing is going to be going into a new all-time high. And that's why it's important that we're factoring in the Bitcoin dominance. When this thing is looking like it's going to be going into a new all-time low for the first time since 2017, and we look at ETH BTC also looking like it's going to be going into the first new all-time high since 2017, there's a lot lining up with it. Stock market is looking a little bit bearish here in the shorter time frames. It could bounce where we're at, but we kind of need to bounce right now. If this drops any lower, then I think the Bitcoin is also going to drop a little bit lower. It's kind of at our last line in the sand. If we lose the $69,000 level, then for me, I think Bitcoin does end up revisiting all the way back down to the mid-cycle range at the minimum, and it could even come back down to like $61,000. This is what I'm leaning towards if we lose $69,000. If we hold it, you know, obviously we're looking at price discovery, so it's really simple, but right now is the most important time that we could possibly have. Bullish above, bearish below, very simple to play. Same thing with the stock market. If we lose this support, I think we're bearish. DXY looks bearish, which is at least encouraging towards Bitcoin and the stock market. And so guys, we're going to watch and see. I'll keep you updated. If you did find any value in this video, please do me a favor, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. If you guys do want to see how I'm investing my portfolio long term, you can sign up on my website. Anything I'm buying, selling, trading over the cycle, and when I take profit, links are in the description to go ahead and sign up on my website. And with that being said, guys, I'll catch you in the next one. As always, peace out.